Hello everyone and welcome to PC Retro Tech. Those who watched the channel in the last month or so will know that I've been working through a large collection of video cards which I purchased very cheap online and trying them out in my 1.45 GHz Pentium 3 machine. So we're up to the AGP cards, and I've already done about 7 of those in the previous video, which you can check out if you haven't seen it already. And in this week's episode, I'm going to look at the next batch of AGP cards, and I have, again, 7 cards to try out. These are the 7 cards, and I'm going to go through them quickly to point out any interesting features that they have. So the first one is a very interesting card. It's an ATI Radeon 7500, and the reason I think this is quite interesting is that even though it's a very small card, it has 6 texture mapping units. So it's a 2002 card, but I'm expecting it to perform quite well for that reason. So it's RAID 7 architecture, and it has 290 MHz core speed. It's just a 64 megabyte card, but I think it's going to give some very good scores. So the next one is a bit older. So this is 1998, and it's quite a common card. It's an ATI Rage Pro Turbo. And of course, it's a lot slower, so the core and memory is clocked at 75 megahertz, and it's just a 2x AGP card. It's only 8 megabytes, so we're probably going to expect this to run the slowest out of all of the other cards here, and it's really nothing special. The next one is an NPACT, which I've not heard of that brand before. So it's an NPACT 440 SE. It's a 64 megabyte card. So basically it has a GeForce 4 MX 440 SE chipset. And you remember in the last lot of AGP cards we looked at a 460. So this will be an interesting one to compare with it. It has a core speed of 250 and memory bandwidth of 200 or effective bandwidth of 400. And it's an 8x AGP card. So it should be quite an interesting card, but I don't think it's going to beat the card that we looked at last time. This is very similar. This is another GeForce 4 MX 440, and again it's a 64 megabyte card. But this one is only a 4x AGP, whereas that was 8. The memory speeds are the same, but this one actually has the core clocked faster at 275 megahertz. So the 440 is, funnily enough, actually a better card than the 440 SE, it seems. So it would be interesting to compare those, and then compare those with the 460. Now the next card is a bit of a sad story, unfortunately. It is a GeForce 7. So this would have been fantastic to look at. It's an MSI MS V-064, which is to say it's got a 7600 GT chipset in it. It's a 512 megabyte card, so it's very, very late. And the core speed here is 560 megahertz, and the memory is a whopping 700 megahertz, 1400 effective. It's also 128 bit. So this should be a really great card. Unfortunately, it has some problems. So first of all, the fan doesn't spin properly. It's not a major problem because you can just give it a little bit of a flick and it'll go. But the main problem is you can't get drivers for Windows 98 for it. I went on the Vogons forum, and they actually have some modded drivers to allow cards from this era to work on Windows 98, but they didn't seem to work with this one. And it's not clear whether that's the drivers of the card, as I'll explain in a moment. So at first I thought, well, probably the reason it doesn't work is that I'm using Windows 98 and I should be using 2nd edition. So the first thing I did is install Windows 98 2nd edition on a second hard drive, just so I could see whether that was the issue. And I didn't get any different result at all. It just doesn't work. You can't even get the desktop to work properly with this card. So in the end, I bit the bullet and I thought, okay, I'm going to install Windows XP on a second hard drive. I have a boxed edition of Windows XP, and I even put Service Pack 2 on. And unfortunately, although it does work in the sense that you get the desktop up and it seems to install just fine, as soon as you do anything 3D with this, it just hangs the computer. In fact, the mouse cursor won't move, and it's just a dead hang. So I actually tried quite a number of different NVIDIA driver versions. I spent more than a day probably working on this, trying to get it to go. And for those who are wondering, yes, I did notice the power connector here, and I did have it plugged in at all times. So this is really a shame. It really means that the 3D part of this card is not working. And further evidence of that, when you install 3D Mark 2001, it actually uses the texture unit on this to generate some textures during the installation process, and that actually hangs. So that's even more evidence that this really just doesn't work. So I don't think it's a driver issue, because I've tried so many different drivers now, and it's not an OS issue. It could be something to do with the machine itself, an incompatibility, but I doubt it. I think this is probably a faulty card. There's no visible damage that I can see. I can't see any missing surface mount components or anything like that. It's just really a shame that that's not going to work. That would have been the best card by a long way, but unfortunately we're going to have to leave it out of the comparison this week. So the next one is nothing particularly special. It's another Radeon 9200, and you remember that we already saw some of those in the last roundup. And it's a 128 megabyte card, 8x AGP, and it's going to be interesting because it has a core speed of 250 megahertz, but I expect it's going to perform roughly the same as the other 9200s that we've seen. So let's have a look at that later on and do a comparison and see whether that is indeed the case. So the final one here is a ProLink PixelView GeForce 2 MX400. So pretty early card. It's actually 2001, this particular one. It's a 4x AGP with a core speed of 200 megahertz. So again, I don't think we're going to expect too much from this card, but I do note that it has 4 texture mapping units. So again, this will be interesting to see the effect that has on the performance here, and we can compare with other similar cards and see how that performs. So let's get stuck into it and put these in the machine and do some benchmarking and see how they all compare. Let's start with the 3D Mark 99 benchmarks, and the first thing you'll notice is that 3 of the cards are done quite well here. So one of the GeForce 4s, the ATI Radeon 9200 and the GeForce 2 MX400, and that's a bit of a surprise perhaps, because the GeForce 2 is a much earlier generation and you wouldn't expect this to do quite so well. But as we've said before, this 3D Mark 99 really tests more the pixel pushing power rather than the 3D capability, or at least just very rudimentary 3D capabilities of cards. You can certainly see that the card that we predicted would do the worst, the ATI Rage Pro Turbo, that did go way slower than all of the other cards. It's a bit of a surprise, given that it is an AGP card. You would expect it to perform quite well, given what this benchmark actually does. But no, it really is a slow card in comparison. So it's quite surprising that 2 of the GeForce cards there, the GeForce 4 cards, don't have the same performance. They're both GeForce 4 MX440s, although one is an SE, and you can see that one of them is like 50% faster than the other, which is very, very surprising, not what I expected at all. But we'll see if that holds up through the later benchmarks. It may just be an artifact of this particular benchmark. That's unclear at this point. The ATI Radeon 7500 has done quite well here. It's certainly not pulling ahead of the other cards, as I suspected that it would, but we'll have a look in the later benchmarks and see if there's any difference. So we didn't break any records here. The 7365 is actually a little bit short of the all-time record on this rig for this benchmark, which was around the 7382 mark. So that was the ATI Radeon 9600. But again, this benchmark isn't really as relevant in terms of 3D performance, because it's very, very early 3D technology that it's testing. And so here are the 3D Mark 2000 benchmarks, and you can see that GeForce 2 has fallen a little bit behind. and it's exactly what we expected would happen with the later benchmarks. The ATI Rage Pro Turbo is now way behind and is so slow that you probably wouldn't want to use it on this machine at all, given all of the other great options that you have here. And the ATI Radeon 7500 at the start there is proving to be a bit of a disappointment, so I'm kind of hoping that it'll catch up somehow in the 2001, but I'm a little bit skeptical that it's going to do that now. You can see now that the two GeForce 4s are about the same score, so that disparity isn't evident here, which is a bit of a surprise. But we're still not splitting the Radeon 9200 and the GeForce 4s. They seem to be about equivalent, which is not too surprising. Perhaps there's only about a year separating those cards. So let's see what happens in the later benchmarks. These are the 3D Mark 2001 benchmarks, and from my point of view these are the most interesting and relevant ones because they're using the latest 3D technology out of the three benchmarks. And in fact, if a card doesn't support certain features, it'll lose points for that and it'll fall behind. Certainly the ATI Rage Pro Turbo has dropped out altogether here. It doesn't even run this benchmark. It's probably a memory issue mainly. It's only got 8 megabytes and that's probably not even enough to load all the textures. But even the GeForce 2 MX400 at the end there, you can see is now behind, which is quite different to what we saw in 3D Mark 99 where it was up with the leaders. And again, that's just down to the fact that it doesn't support all the same 3D features that the later generations of card do. So you can see that the ATI Radeon 9200 has come out on top here, and I think this could have gone either way. It's only 1 year ahead of the GeForce 4s, and you know, we've seen before that the GeForce cards were pretty amazing and often beating out the ATI competition. But as you can see, it did actually pull ahead here. You can also see that the GeForce 4s are now neck and neck, so we don't see that disparity that we had earlier. And I probably should have mentioned that the second GeForce 4 card there actually has a little bit of a hardware issue, so it's quite blurry. And I don't just mean, you know, as a connoisseur of graphics I thought it looked a little bit blurrier than usual. I mean it's really quite blurry. You probably wouldn't want to use it. It was readable, but there was clearly a hardware issue. And you find this sometimes in old cards that they degrade over time and the performance goes down. So that is one potential explanation. But I'm a little bit doubtful given that you know, in this benchmark they again have the same score. So that ATI Radeon 7500 at the beginning there, that is after all quite a disappointment. You know, it was a 64 megabyte card and fairly recent. It shouldn't have performed badly. It's a 2002 card. It also has 290 megahertz core, 230 megahertz memory, 460 effective. The only thing I can see is 4 times AGP instead of 8, but that really shouldn't make a lot of difference. And with those 6 texture mapping units, I had really expected this to be one of the best performing cards here. It's quite surprising, just in that 1 year between that card and the 9200, how much of a difference there was. And again, it's very surprising that it doesn't beat the GeForce 4s. So the only other thing that I can do is compare with the other cards that we've tested already. So we tested 3 9200s, as you know, and they were getting much lower scores here again. So on the 3D Mark 2001 benchmark, we were getting 3,852, 4,133, 4,375. So it's significantly behind this ATI Radeon 9200. Now, a couple of those were probably SEs. One of them didn't seem to be, we thought, because it was significantly faster than the others, but not this much faster. So I really don't have an explanation. I mean, we even had a 128 meg card there, so there isn't an explanation as far as I'm concerned of why this particular ATI Radeon 9200 is so quick. The other thing to compare with, of course, is the all-time records on this particular rig with 3D Mark 2001, and unfortunately we didn't touch those. The GeForce 4 Ti 4200, I got 7,504 points, and similarly for the ATO Radeon 9600, 7,523 points. So we haven't got anywhere near the record for this rig, but still a very interesting range of cards here and quite a lot of surprises in the benchmarks. To round out the comparison of all of these cards, I decided to pick three, one from each of the different eras that's represented here. So this one's 1998, this is 2001, and this is 2003. So this was the slowest card, the Rage Pro Turbo, and this was the fastest, the Radeon 9200. And in the middle, it was a bit of a toss-up which one to pick, but I decided to go with the GeForce 2 MX 400 as sort of a middle-of-the-road card. And what I'm going to do is pick three graphical applications that were available in each of these years to do a comparison. Now, my initial thought was to use the Unigine demos, but unfortunately, although they're very, very graphically impressive, they don't actually run on Windows 98. So then I started looking at games. I have a reasonable collection of games, but not too many. But it's actually quite difficult to find games that will run on Windows 98 on all of these three cards and on a Pentium 3 with the specs that I have, and then satisfy various other requirements with regard to being family friendly, etc., which is particularly important in the location where I live. So instead, what I decided to do was to take assembly demos. So I'll take an assembly demo from 98, one from 2000, and one from 2003, and run it on all three cards, and then we should be able to see the difference visually. It's also going to be something that you wouldn't necessarily have seen before, although I am going to pick the most popular demos from each of the 3 years, at least according to one metric. So I'm going to get these demos from the website POUET, I don't know how you pronounce that. And basically if you go to PRODS, which stands for products, and select Windows, then you'll get the list of all the demos in order of popularity. And I've just gone down that list until I found one from each of the eras that's represented here. And we're going to take a look at those. The first demo I'm going to try here is called Fulcrum, and it's from 1998. And I'm running it on the slowest of the cards here, the Rage Pro Turbo, which is also 1998. And you can see that it appears to be running quite slowly, although the frame rate doesn't look too bad. But I am seeing some tearing here as the frames are updating. There's some lines going across the screen. Now, of course, it could be just that the demo is synced with music and it's designed to have a kind of spaced out look to it, and that's why it's going slowly. But we'll see when we use the other video cards whether this speeds up at all. At the moment it does look quite slow. It is very detailed and incredibly impressive for 1998. Now I had to hack the config file for this. When I tried to run it in its default resolution, it didn't run properly. I tried to put my monitor into a resolution that was way too high for the monitor, so I changed the configuration so that it would run in 640/480. I think this section here looks particularly slow, and we'll see in a moment. This part here actually looks normal speed, so we'll compare those in the later video cards and see if it's any better at those. Okay, here's the same demo again, but this time running on the GeForce 2 MX 400, and we see that same very slow movement that we saw with the first card, so that seems to be built into the demo. It looks a little brighter to my eyes, and I can still see that same tearing that's going on, so that also just seems to be a feature of the demo itself. Speeding up the card hasn't helped that. In fact, everything here looks almost identical in performance to the first card, and that's not too much of a surprise actually. In 1998, a lot of demos had to use a lot of CPU power as well as the graphics card, because the graphics cards just weren't that fancy, and so basically you're bound by the performance of the CPU as much as you are by the graphics card. Now it might speed up a little bit as the graphics card gets better, but it looks like this thing is not just being bottlenecked by that. I am fairly sure that it is using the graphics card instead of just doing all the rendering using CPU, because there's just way too many 3D models here, and it's moving about way too quickly to be done just using CPU, I think. So yeah, it looks like the performance of this card is about the same, so let's try the third card. Now for the Radeon 9200, so this will be an interesting one to compare. Yeah, it's still working very, very slowly. It looks a little blurrier to me for some reason. Maybe that's just my imagination. I think it's very easy to be subjectively influenced by various things here. But yeah, it looks exactly the same. I think there's really no difference at all. The card itself just isn't speeding this demo up. So that's a very interesting finding. I think that the other demos that we're going to run are going to have a very different result from this, but this looks like it's either frame capped. Obviously, you know, when you have a demo that has to run against a music track, everything needs to keep perfect time, so there's a very good reason to have things running at a specific speed. And yeah, it doesn't look like any of the rendering improves at all, as from what I can see anyway. It looks like it runs just as slow and with just as much tearing, no matter what the card is. Alright, so let's move on to another demo now. This demo is called Alien Prophets, and I'm running it here on the ATI Rage Pro Turbo, so the slowest of the three cards. So the demo is 2001, and of course the card is 1998. So given that the demo scene usually work with the latest possible technology and then try and push it right to the limit, this is not too surprising that we're just getting a bunch of flickering. There's no smooth animation here at all. It's also not clear if everything is actually being rendered correctly here. Some of the elements just look white, which doesn't look correct to me. So it's even possible that some of the 3D features are missing from this particular card. So anyway, let's have a look at how this looks on one of the better cards. This is Alien Prophets running on the GeForce 2 MX400, and boy, what an enormous jump from that sort of, you know, 1 frame a second all the way up to what even looks a little fast in this particular bit here. But on the whole, it looks like it's around about right. We've got a 2001 demo with a 2001 graphics card. You can see that it's using quite a lot of features of the graphics card as well. There's quite a lot of variation in the effects that are going on here. Of course, some of that could be CPU rendering instead of graphics card, but it's very, very clear that this is using the graphics card for most of the effects. This particular part seems to be running a lot slower than the first part of the demo, and my guess is that it uses some more advanced 3D effects there. But yeah, I think that's a really great demonstration of just how much difference it makes going from that 1998 card to a 2001 card. So let's have a look now and see how the 2003 card compares, whether we can actually spot any difference at all. This is the Radeon 9200, and to my eye it doesn't look that much faster. I think it is faster, but it's not that much faster than the GeForce 2 MX400. And it's perhaps not too surprising, given that the thing was already running very, very smoothly. There's not that much between smooth and very smooth. At least I find that. I don't know how it is for you. Perhaps you can let me know in the comments below whether you can actually see an objective difference in these two rates of performance. Again, this little bit here looks a little bit slower than the other parts, but it is actually pretty smooth now. So I think I can see a slight difference in performance here. It's not jerking as much. I did notice some very slight jerking in, you know, with the GeForce 2 MX400. This actually looks a little fast to me. I think this, again, I can actually see the difference. Although it's very subjective, you know, if I went away from this and came back a day later, I really couldn't tell you which one was the, you know, the faster card, I think. But anyway, I think that's a pretty good demonstration. So let's move on now to a 2003 demo. Now it's a nice coincidence that the last demo that I'm using, the 2003 one, is by Firebrush, which is a group that really inspired me back in the day. I was never directly involved with the demo scene, but I did do some demo programming of my own at home, and this group, much more than all of the others, was my inspiration. Now, unfortunately, with this particular card, this is the 1998 card, this 2003 demo doesn't run. It just bombs out immediately. So we kind of expected this. Once you get beyond a certain requirement, the card just won't keep up anymore. So let's try with the GeForce 2 MX400. Here we go with the GeForce 2 MX400, and by the way, the previous demo was not actually called Alien Prophets. That's the name of the group that made it. And it's kind of their fault that I got it mixed up, because the demo itself doesn't have a name, it's just an empty string. So I looked at Alien Prophets and thought that must be the name of the demo. Anyway, this is a Firebrush production, and as you can see, it's running okay on this 2001 card, although I would say that's jerking quite a lot. Now these guys were really master demo makers. They made a very impressive tool called the Werkzeug, which just means tool, for making demos, and they developed that over many years and finally open sourced the thing. And it just has so many features, you know, effects, modeling, you know, textures. It's really an incredible tool for putting together demo productions. Anyway, I think we've got a good idea of what this looks like here. It's a little bit jerky. The frame rate is not terribly high, but it's still very visually impressive. So let's try it out now with the 2003 card and see how it looks. And here we go with the Radeon 9200. And I didn't catch it on film, but as I quit with the GeForce 2 MX400, I actually got a blue screen of death from Windows. And I think you'll agree that this looks way smoother, and it's probably the way it was intended to be viewed. Just everything is moving very smoothly across the screen, and even the film that's running up the side there, that film effect is much faster. So I think this was definitely intended to run on a 2003 graphics card. So you can see that the earlier demos don't really show as much of a difference between the cards, and the later demos really do make a huge difference. We went all the way from not running at all through, you know, mediocre performance with a low frame rate to running perfectly. Whereas with the early demos, you couldn't tell any difference between the three cards, and that's very similar to what we saw with 3D Mark 99 versus, say, 3D Mark 2001. So anyway, that's all I really have time for this week. It's taken a long time to try and get that GeForce 7 going, unfortunately, more than a day of work. So you have to stop somewhere. But hopefully you enjoyed this look into you know, the different video cards, the AGP video cards. There's more of these to come, so if you're interested in that, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in a later video. Bye!